Hi guys, we are Group 2 and we are assigned to discuss Chapter 2. The first topic is Exploring Expository Techniques. As we proceed to the topic, what is exposition? Exposition is a type of oral or written but mostly written used by a writer when his or her intention is to explain something, to analyze an idea, to classify a thing, to give the correct definition of a term, to make other follow directions, to point out similarities and differences, to classify causes and effects, to present data, to interpret research works and others. Expository writing must begin with a topic sentence that includes a central or main idea. This sentence tells the reader what the composition is all about. Expository writing must also include supporting sentences, those provided by facts, details, and explanations. An expository composition must end with a concluding statement. This final statement restates the main idea. One of these examples are news reports, magazines, and etc. Therefore, many textbook and other printed or electronic material make of use this type of writing, probably the most utilized form of text writing. This chapter shall be divided into 4 lessons which will explain the nature and use of the following expository techniques as they are applied in technical writing: classification, definition, description of process, and description of mechanism. And that will be discussed with the next reporter.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Naime and I'm going to discuss about classification. James Belushi said, "In an old days, you would have one lawyer to handle everything: speeding tickets, buying a house, contracts, litigation, real estate, copyrights, leasing, entertainment, intellectual property, forensic, accounting, criminal offenses. The list goes on. Now you have to have a separate lawyer for each one of these categories." We usually classify things in our daily lives all the time. Classification means dividing into groups, classes, categories, etc. This is normally done in accordance with several ideas, standards, or principles on which judgments are based. Just like, for example, we use classification when we preparing our shopping list, classifying or grouping the items we need to avoid walking back and forth in the market. There are several ways to classify something. Other example is you can classify food by region, French, Japanese, and Filipino, or you can classify food item by mealtime, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The possibilities are limitless. It's taking one main subject and taking it into categories or groups. Categorizing gives us a way to describe an item to others. It provides connection between ideas for similarities and differences. Classification makes broad subject break down into smaller and more specific. One way of classifying objects or ideas is to look for relationship among them to organize them into groups. It may either be on the basis of their similarities and differences. An important part of creating useful categories is seeing the different ways that things can be grouped. Make sure that the categories you create have a single basis of classification and that the group fits the categories you propose. So, how does this help us write an essay? Classification is done by the writer when he or she believes that there are shared qualities or characteristics about a subject matter. Classification paper says something meaningful about how a whole relates to parts or parts relate to a whole. It requires the ability to group related words, ideas, and characteristics. So, in division and classification, when we say division, it is separating a group or class of people, things, or ideas into categories you establish. While classification, as I've said, it is placing individuals, objects, or ideas into already established categories. Division deals with one thing only. It separates the thing into parts, pieces, sections, or categories. Classifications deals with an assortment of things that share certain similarities. Example in classification, houses. It classifies the different types of houses like small house, big house, long narrow house, and wide house. While in the division, it divides the parts of the house, the walls, the foundation, the roof, and the floor. So in classification, it is about sorting, and in division, it is breaking into parts. Another example, students, and divided them by gender, the males and females. So this is the division part. Then the classification would be when you put individual people into the category which they belong. So as you can see, classification and division always works together. In writing classification paper, make sure that you find something you would like to write about. Just think of interesting categories that will capture interest and hook your reader. Once you decided on your categories, it's now important to explain them and define them. The key for good classification is to be interesting, avoid the obvious, and to make sure that you have a purpose for the classification. Ask yourself what is the point of putting this subject into categories. And that's all. Thank
Good
you.
morning, everyone. I am Adrien Marie Estaniel. This is the continuation of Chapter 2, Lesson 2, Definition. There are times when we are asked by people around us to define or give meaning to an unfamiliar words. When we define words or unfamiliar terms, we give concise but exact meanings of an unfamiliar words and special meanings of familiar words. Definition is a useful technique in oral or written communication. It is particularly a must for a technical writer to be able to define the terms with multiple meanings and that those that are unfamiliar to the reader. The primary reason to include definitions in your writing is to avoid misunderstanding with your audience. Your definition of an unfamiliar words should not lead your audience looking up more words in order to understand your definition. Methods of defining terms. The traditional way to define is to put the term in a class and then explain how it is different from other members of the class. There are two methods of defining terms. Number one is simple and extended. Simple definition could be formulated by bearing in mind its three parts. Number 1, species, 2, genus, and 3, differentia. These methods of definition is commonly used in technical writing whether formally, semi-formally, or non-formally. When using simple definition, note that a species or the term to be defined may be introduced by a determiner. A determiner is a word that introduces a noun. For example, the, a, an, this, that, this, and those, etc. The species is the subject of the definition or the term to be defined, while a genus or the class category where the term belongs is always connected to the species by a linking verb. A linking verb are verbs that serves as a connection between a subject. Example, is, are, where, was, etc. Both species and genus can be introduced by a determiner. The more informative and specific the genus is, the less we have to say in the differentia. To make the definition complete, a differentia is written to give characteristics of the term that make it different from other terms belonging to the same genus. For further explanation, here are the examples. Language is a form of communication. The word language is the species or the term to be defined. A genus is always connected with a species by a linking verb. The linking verb here is the word is, and a is a determiner. As what I have said earlier that both species and genus can be introduced by a determiner. Then form is the class category where the term belongs. Of communication is the differentia that states the distinctive characteristics and explain how it is different from other members of the class. Other examples are an architect is the species, is a professional is the genus, who designs buildings is the differentia. Communication, species, is a process is the genus, of giving and receiving information is the differentia. Another method of defining a term is expanded or extended definition. It is a long, detailed clarification that uses one or more paragraph to expand on a word that may be difficult to comprehend. This is done by stipulation, operation, explication, cause and effect, classification, example, and other rhetorical functions. Example: communication is a systematic process in which people interact with and through symbols to create and interpret meanings. Communications is the species or the term to be defined. Systematic process is the genus or the class where the term belongs, in which people interact with and through symbols to create and interpret meanings are the differentia, because it contains explication and examples. The purpose of definition is to clarify, not to confuse. A definition more difficult than the term being defined is useless. That's all. Thank you.
Informal definition, on the other hand, does not follow a pattern. The only objective is to give meaning to a word that is unfamiliar or explain the special meaning of a familiar word. Word meaning enter informal definition by means of providing denotative or connotative meaning. It means that it is marked by the absence of formality or ceremony. Denotation. It is the basic literal meaning of the dictionary meaning of a word, while connotation is the additional shade of meaning that implies a side that is dictionary meaning. Denotation also means that it is the literal or primary meaning of a word. Connotation. It is the positive or negative association a word naturally carries. It also means that it is an idea or feeling that a word invokes in addition to its literal or primary meaning.
Description of process. A process is a series of events or actions that occur over time to accomplish something. A complete process involves collecting raw materials, a series of stages or steps in which the raw materials are processed to get a finished product at the end. Each stage has an input and output. Ryan Holiday said, "Writing the perfect paper is a lot like a military operation. It takes discipline, foresight, research, strategy, and if done right, and it's total victory." There are writing tasks that email an explanation of how something works, how something's done, or how something's made. That is why knowing how to describe a process will enable a technical writer, his or her reader, to perform or do something. In describing a process, a writer explains the arrangement of a sequence in chronological order as it is used in technical writing. The process is akin to mechanism description. Here, process description includes sequence, instructions, and procedure. Sequence is you are writing to describe a series of events or a process in some sort of order. Usually, this order is based on time. Instruction, written by step, the instructions found everywhere, like on the back of packages, on single sheet of paper inside the boxes. Instructions are written by to provide the reader with the background information on how a process is or was accomplished. Procedure, a process is a series of related tasks or methods that together turn input into output. There are two separate concepts which we must briefly explain here: how to do something and how something occurs. The first calls for is instruction or procedure. The second one is the for sequence. In like manner, process is also a description of equipment, materials, and procedures. Graphic materials are used for detailed presentation of the process. The writer make use of sequence markers to follow the natural or mechanical system. Graphic materials is also defined as documents in the form of pictures, photographs, drawing, and etc. When we describe a process or procedure, we often use the present passive tense, is or are plus verb plus ed. For example, is manufactured, is controlled, and etc. When describing a process, we use sequence markers to link sentences like first, second, then, next, subsequently, finally, at last. Sequence markers for the word sequence means that time has passed, like past, present, and future. Marker means is where you are focusing your attention in that period of time. How do you make paper from a tree? Article by Stacy Wonders, published by WonderFolies.org. The process begins with the raw wood, which is made up of fiber called cellulose. The cellulose fibers stuck together with a natural glue called lining. When the lining is removed and the cellulose fibers are separated and reorganized, paper can be made.
Description of mechanism. We may belong to different fields and discipline, but there are certain machine and apparatuses that we use to make our work easier. Description of mechanism is explanation of a system or part of apparatus. This includes the characteristics and functions of a piece of device and the totality of mechanism. Mechanism description is a short report designed to convey to the reader a technical understanding of the function, appearance, and operation of a particular object. It also explains the arrangement and shape of object in space. In writing description of mechanism, the writer may be guided the following questions. What is it? Or what is the equipment? What is the machine? What is the device? Or what is the apparatus? What is its function? Or what is the purpose of that machine or that object? What does it look or its appearance? What are its principal parts or what are the main parts of that machine or object? For example, description mechanism of a scissor. The following information explain the scissors and their individual parts. The scissors are used to cut various thin materials such as paper and cloth. They are approximately 15 centimeters long, made of steel, and they can be easily held in one hand. The scissors consist of the following parts: two blades, a pin, and two handles ending with two finger holes. The passage answers the question, what is the object, its functions, and its appearance. In these passages, it will explain the principal part or the main part of the scissors. The two blades are the flat parts of the scissors that consist of two sharp cutting edges. Each blade is 7 centimeters long. The inner side of a blade is very sharp, while the external side is designed precisely to prevent injuring the user. The two blades are joined in such a way that the cutting edges lie against each other and cut a particular material. The blades of well-designed scissors lie on the top of each other and remain in contact whenever the scissors are closed. It explains the use of blades of the scissor. The next one will explain the pin of the scissors. The pivot point is a central point that is usually presented by a pin. The place of the pivot point depends on the length of the scissor so that it balances the scissors parts and makes it stable. The pin allows the two handles to slide against each other and ensures that the closing action of the scissors is done easily with the minimum effort. The next one, or the last passage, will explain the use of the two handle of the scissor. The handle is the area between a blade and a finger hole. The length of the two handles depends on the location of the central point that balances the two sides of the scissors. The two handles end with two finger holes of almost the same size. Holding the scissor from these two holes using the thumb and the index finger allows the user to close or open its blades. The two handles with the finger holes are usually made of plastic, but sometimes they are made of steels. And that's an example of description of mechanism. Here are some important notes in description of mechanism. Don't sell the object. A writer is not required to persuade the reader that the object is wonderful, valuable, or scary, but do mention the details and let your readers make the value judgment for themselves. Just describe it and provide whatever level of detail your reader requires. The end. Thank you.